Ever say something and almost immediately regret it? While we were gone, I picked up a church bulletin on Wednesday night with a similar title to what we're talking about tonight, Things I Wished I Hadn't Said. And there were 3 examples in it from the scriptures. Nothing we're looking at tonight comes from that article except, of course, the idea. The idea is that there are things that oftentimes individuals or groups will say that they then very much later regret. I've had that experience a few times, and it's very uncomfortable when you realize that something you just said was inappropriate. I knew a fellow preacher who liked to play practical jokes, which normally I don't do, because I don't think they're all that funny usually. But a situation arose that lent itself to just a little bit of the bending of the rules for me on that occasion. A preacher had moved to his area, my friend's area, and tried to take over the congregation, unsuccessfully, gratefully. He and I had talked about Bob, not his real name. He had destroyed 2 congregations in other areas. I mean, they no longer existed. They had 50 to 70 members when he went there, and within a couple years, they had dissolved entirely. And now, this fellow, Bob, had moved to his community and tried to take over that particular congregation. Well, when he was rebuffed, Bob decided to leave there and try to get hired in a congregation about 100 miles away. Bob told my friend that one of the elders there, Sam, not his name either, might be contacting him for a recommendation. And he was kind of at a loss to know what to say because of the trouble that he knew this fellow had caused, not only elsewhere, but when he came there. And I thought it would be funny to impersonate Sam and put my friend on the spot. So I called him up and said, "Hello, this is Sam. I'm calling to ask you a reference on Bob." Well, I thought he'd recognize my voice immediately and we'd both have a good laugh. But he didn't. And he started giving serious answers to questions that you would ask about a preacher. I wished immediately that I had not done it. It was awkward, and he said way too much for me to interrupt him and say, "Hey, this is just a joke." So I bore it out till the end of the conversation. He still doesn't know I did that, unless he's watching. And I'm not about to tell him. As far as I know, no harm came from the prank, but it was simply not a good idea. It was simply not something that should have been done. Tonight, we're going to look at some things that people said from the book of Numbers. And they probably, all of them, regretted having said what they said shortly after they said it. However, in their case, very bad results came as because of what they had done. So this will be a study from the book of Numbers, and by the time we get done, you'll have a good list of all the rebellions and all of the complaints and murmurings that there are in the book of Numbers. The Israelites complained in the passage that was just read for us from Numbers chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. This is our first one. God heard it. The text says God heard it. Nobody has to inform or snitch to God on what has happened. He doesn't have to get his information from somebody else. He knows everything. He hears everything. Jesus even knew the thoughts of people. So he heard Israel complain. And it was a reason that was not sufficient for a complaint. And there was a fire and there was burning, and the place was called Taberah because of the burning. But God responded to their complaining. Not the way they had anticipated, but he responded with the penalty of the burning. There is a reason why in the New Testament, Paul writes, "Do all things without murmuring and complaining." Philippians 2:14. And that is just exactly what we're looking at in the book of Numbers this evening. You will see thoroughly his attitude toward that kind of behavior. Number 2 is Numbers 11, verses 4 through 6. Now the mixed multitude who came among them yielded to intense craving, so the children of Israel also wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish that we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up, and there is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." Well, the nation is complaining again. And God is not happy again with their complaining. Notice the ingratitude on their part. God was providing daily food for about 2 million people in the wilderness. And they are unhappy with the quality of the food. They remember the better variety of food that they had in Egypt while they were in captivity, and complaining that they were in captivity. Now they're out of captivity and complaining about the food. This doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's extremely ungrateful. God said that he would give them so much meat, they would get sick of it. And that occurred. The third example is from this same chapter, verses 21 and 22. Only this time, it's not Israel, it's Moses. Now that may seem odd, but no one is above offering complaints. So in verses 21 and 22, our third example is, Moses said, "The people whom I am among are 600,000 men on foot. Yet you have said, I will give them meat that they may eat for a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to provide enough for them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together on them for them to provide enough for them?" Moses seems a little bit skeptical at this particular time and does not know how God is going to keep what he has promised. But God rebukes him in a way when he says in verse 23, "Has the Lord's arm been shortened? Now you shall see what I say will happen to you or not." So there is a mild rebuke of Moses. He may have wished he hadn't said those words to God, but he was not penalized at that particular time, at least, for having said what he said. But Israel was, for their ungrateful attitude. Next, we go to Numbers chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Once again, we we're used to Israel complaining, but this time it's not the nation, it's Aaron and Miriam. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses, and since her name is first, she may have been the instigator of what occurred, spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord heard it. Again, the Lord always hears everything. Moses didn't have to run to God and say, "Did you hear what they said about me?" No, God heard it. He doesn't need to be informed as to what people say or think. But this does show us that complaining is universal. Men, women, old, young, even spiritual leaders like Moses. It's a universal concept. People seem to lend themselves to it, and some of the very best of people do it. First of all, Aaron and Miriam had no legitimate reason to complain against their brother. Scholars are divided as to whether this was a new wife that Moses took or whether it was of Zipporah. I don't know that I've ever been able to resolve that. If they were complaining about Zipporah, it sure took them a long time to do it. So it may be that Moses had taken an additional wife and they were complaining about that. But whatever the situation was, they should not have put themselves on the same level as Moses. Has not God spoken through us? Yes, he had. But once again, the Lord heard this, and he gives an answer, and probably by the time God finishes with this answer, they wished they hadn't said what they said. Here's what God said to them, beginning in verse 6 of Numbers 12. "Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly and not in dark sayings. And he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" Yes, I wished I hadn't said that. No doubt. Aaron and Miriam said to themselves. Miriam was punished with leprosy for her part in this, which Moses prayed on her behalf for it to depart from her. The next one we want to look at is probably well known and very familiar to most everybody. Number 5 in the book is the complaints of the people about conquering the land and the complaints of the spies that came up after evaluating the land. For this one, we go to Numbers chapter 13 and look at verse 28. "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there," meaning, of course, giants. Then they go ahead and say even more in verses 31 through 33. "But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we.' And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land when they had, which they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. Therefore we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So there is the complaint. Now in the next chapter, Joshua and Caleb try to assure the people that if God is fighting for them, it will be okay. But they do not succeed in their argumentation. Thus, we come to chapter 14 and verse 10. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. I wonder how long it took to realize they had said the wrong thing. Probably not long, because the rest of the verse tells us, now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before the children of Israel. Uh-oh. We know something's wrong now, don't we? A minute ago, we were all willing to stone Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb. But now the glory of the Lord has appeared. That's not a good plan to pursue at this point, is it? And so God intervened, and they left off with their plan to stone the leaders. Now, what was the upshot of all of this? First of all, in chapter 14 and verse 37, those very men who brought up the evil report about the land died by plague before the Lord. So 10 of those 12 spies who brought up the evil report died that very year. What about everybody else? Well, we find out about that in verses 29 through 31. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness. All of you who were numbered according to your entire number from 20 years old and above, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. You shall by no means enter into the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. So because they were raised to a fever pitch and determined that they were not going to take the land, God said, you're right. You're not going to inherit the land, but your children will. Number 6 and 7 and 8 belong to chapter 16, so let's turn over there. In verses 1 through 3, we read of new rebellious attitudes. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men, and they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Does anybody really think that Moses had exalted himself? God chose Moses to be leader back in the wilderness at the burning bush. And he sent Moses to Egypt. And Moses, with the assistance of God's 10 plagues, was able to bring Israel out of Egypt and then to cross the Red Sea on dry ground. Did Moses do all that? Did Moses exalt himself? Of course not. These are frivolous charges to make against Moses. And so Moses says, here's what we'll do. You 250 leaders, bring your censers, and Aaron will bring his, and we'll see whom God has chosen. So in Numbers chapter 16 and verse 7, we read, "Put fire in them and put incense on them before the Lord tomorrow, and it shall be that the man whom the Lord chooses is the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi." So that is what was done. They should have thought through their words more carefully before complaining. Here's what happened in verse 35 of Numbers 16. "And a fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense." Aaron was not consumed, but the 250 rebels were. At that point, of course, I'm sure they had chosen their words more wisely, but it was too late when the punishment was brought about them. And then the other part of the rebellion involved Dathan and Abiram. So let's look at verses 13 and 14. They say, "Is it a small thing that you have brought us up to a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." So they refused even to negotiate with Moses or to be in his presence. Here's what happened to them in verses 28 through 30. "Moses said, 'By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you shall understand that these men have rejected the Lord." And of course, that's precisely what happened. Now, you would think that all of this would have been an indelible lesson that Israel would have learned from and not bothered to complain anymore and not bothered to challenge the leadership of Moses anymore. You only have to go to verse 41 to find out that didn't happen. On the next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Yeah, really? I'd like to know how Moses and Aaron had the ground open up and swallow all those people. That would be a good trick for two men to pull off. They accused them of doing the punishment that God initiated against these people. And so once again they complained about Moses and Aaron. Emotion can just flat out make people irrational. When they dislike somebody, you can't reason with them and say, "Look, your dislike is not rational," because they already have their minds made up. You can't say to them, "Have you noticed how complaining has helped Israel?" Have you noticed that? What benefits have come from us complaining in the wilderness? No, emotion makes people irrational. So we go down to verses 46 through 48 to see the upshot. "So Moses said to Aaron, 'Take a censer and put fire in it, and put incense on it, and take it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them, because wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun.'" God responded by bringing a plague on the people for their continuant and incessant complaining against Moses and Aaron. Then Aaron took it as Moses commanded and ran into the midst of the assembly. And already the plague had begun among the people. So he put in the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living. So the plague was stopped. God had to stop the plague, or who knows how many people would have been destroyed. Well, now we come to number 9, and at least we're going to a different chapter now. We're going to chapter 20, and we want to first of all look at verses 2 through 5. Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron, and the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, "If only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord." You know, I'm thinking that can be arranged. And they go on to contend with Moses, and they said, "Why have you brought us out up with the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink." So once again, we have a new complaint. No water. Now this had happened earlier, but now it has happened again. And God's solution was to provide the water through Moses. But the people have so gotten to Moses that he now is totally frustrated, and he himself makes an error and says something that he probably wishes he had not said. Let's go to chapter 20 and verse 10. "And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, 'Hear now, you rebels! Must we bring water for you out of this rock?'" There's a question that might be asked here. What do you mean, we? Moses didn't have the power to do that. God had the power to do that. Thus, we read in verse 12, "The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me." He was instructed to speak to the rock, not strike it. "Because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." All these years, Moses had tried his best to lead the people, and now he doesn't get to go into the promised land because he said something that he should not have. They took too much upon themselves this time, crediting themselves with supplying the water rather than crediting God who made the water available. And it cost them the entry into the promised land. The next one is not on the sheet that is with the sermon questions. This is from Numbers 21, verses 4 through 9. And this is number 11. "They journeyed from Mount Hor by the way to the Red Sea and to go around the land of Eden. And the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. 'Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there's no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread,'" referring to the manna, of course. "So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, 'We have sinned.'" Well, it is great that they recognized that their words were wrong, that it was something they should not have said. But it's only because they are dying daily that they come to this resolve. So they admit, "We have sinned," verse 7. For we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he would take away the fiery serpents. So Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole, and so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. God was able to give a remedy on that occasion, and of course Jesus refers to this in the New Testament when he says, and I, if I be lifted up, shall draw all men unto me. John 12:32 and 33. Jesus corresponds in a measure to the serpent that Moses raised up in the wilderness. And if we come to him, look at him, follow him, we can be saved also. Number 12 comes to Numbers 25. No words are actually recorded, but let's take a look at what we read in Numbers 25, verses 6 through 9. And indeed, one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brethren, notice that, presented to his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Now when Phinehas the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand. And he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through her body. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. And those who died in the plague were 24,000. The man did not apparently say anything, but by his example, here's what he said. He said, in effect, I am an idolater. I can partake of a sexual religious rite with this woman, and you can't stop me. But Phinehas stopped him. And that ended the plague in which 24,000 Israelites were killed. He probably wished he had not done what he did, but it was too late when he came to that realization. The last one we want to look at is from Numbers chapter 31 and verse 16. Numbers 31 and verse 16, and this regards Balaam. In Numbers 31:16 we read, look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Now, Balaam dies, but he had said something. The exact words that he said are not recorded, but here's what he said. Let the Moabite women go out and entice the Israelite men to get them to participate in idolatrous practices. And then God will curse them. Remember, Balaam himself could not curse them because that was not what God wanted. But through his advice, through his words, he got them cursed, and 24,000 died in the plague. His house full of silver and gold, if that's what he had, perished with him. He surely wishes he had never given that advice, but he couldn't take it back. The damage is already done. So he died when Israel got its vengeance. Now here's the point of all of these illustrations that we've looked at this evening. If you say something you really don't mean, hopefully the results will not be as serious as the ones we've looked at tonight. But be assured that God has heard what you've said. He knows what you have said even in your heart, even if it didn't come out your mouth. If you have said things that you didn't really mean or that you now are embarrassed about having done, ask God for forgiveness for those things. And if you have harmed people, apologize to them for what you have done. Don't let words uttered hastily not be attended to. Make sure that everyone, including God, knows that you were wrong in what you said and wrong in what you advised somebody to do, perhaps as Balaam was. In Colossians 4 and verse 6, let your words be, your speech be seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every person. We need to be careful. Jesus talked about us being judged by the words that we speak. And certainly there's no greater illustration of that than Israel being judged in the wilderness by the things which they said. Let us learn to do all things without murmuring and complaining, and to use our speech for positive encouragement. If there's any who have not obeyed the gospel this evening and you know what you need to do, we stand ready to assist you. Come and let us know. Or if you're already his child and maybe have not been as faithful as you ought, this is a good time to repent. If we can help you in any of these endeavors, let us know while we stand and while we sing.